Okay, the closing the door sign that I need to start. So, hello everyone. My name is Chris, and I will be presenting for you today something about Drupal. But first, mandatory hello slide. You can find me on the social media and on the LinkedIn. For particularly, there is some information here that I love PHP, which is kind of true, and I love Drupal, which is also kind of true. And today we are going to talk about Drupal 8, Drupal 7, and Docker, or maybe Docker and a bit of Drupals. First of all, who am I? I'm a developer and philosopher, or actually a teacher of philosophy. I have some sort of experience in the PHP, like almost 10 years right now. That's a lot of time. And I'm addicted to clean code. I'm the chief technology officer at Code Sushi, and I love code review, though I'm not the sadist. What we are going to be talking actually about. So, first of all, I will do some sort of short introduction to Docker and DockerCompose. I will be speaking about why do we have such thing, what we are using Docker for, a bit about our setup, and some summary about this. So basically we have this project where we needed to migrate some data from Drupal 7 to Drupal 8. And this was a lot of troubles for us, especially because the Drupal 8 was kind of in stage of infancy then, and we figured that it will be the best if we help ourselves with some aid from Docker. So without further ado, I will be starting to talk about Docker right now. So what is Docker? Docker is container management software, and this is like the term which says actually completely nothing unless we explain what the container is. And container is something that is a standalone package of software which contains all the software and only the software required to run particular thing. For example, MySQL. Container will come with everything, every like piece of software, library, parts of operating systems standard library, and only that required for running, for example, MySQL. And what are the benefits of that? Because it's easy to use, it's quite easy to learn unless you understand that container is not actually a virtual machine, and there is a lot of pre-built containers that give you given software. For example, PHP, Apache. There is even container, official container with Drupal. So you can run Drupal without particularly any configuration. So, but Docker is fun, but there is more awesome tool. It's called DockerCompose. It started as a project called Fig. but this project development had been taken over by the Docker team. So DockerCompose is a tool for orchestrating multi-container environments. And what does it mean without fancy words like orchestrating? So basically it means that we can define what services we need, how they connect to each other, what resources they will be using, and make a configuration file that will give us all the features, all the things that we need, all the setup and stuff like this. And this makes actually this, what I have said just right now, sounds like a Vagrant. But first of all, Vagrant has a kind of complicated configuration file. You need to know a bit of Ruby to write a Vagrant file. And for example, DockerCompose uses YAML, which is super easy, of course, and is something that is clear, and you actually do not have to understand how the YAML files work. You just see them and you just get it. They are super easy to learn. So this is about all the selling points about DockerCompose. So right now, why we need that, why we needed Docker, and something like that. Unfortunately, I cannot disclose any information about our migration process other than the general idea. So basically, our migration process was like this. We needed to import some data from Drupal 7 to Drupal 8. But we also needed to import the media files. And all the plugins, all the modules that we tried failed to deliver that functionality. Please note that this is not something like happening right now. It was in the beginning of the 2016, so a lot of tools there were still in the heavily development. So basically, we came up with our own process, which needed to have two instances side by side. Instance of Drupal 8 needed to have access to the file system of Drupal 7, and also Drupal 7 needed to be crawlable by Drupal 8. So we needed to have like two websites side by side. One can access the other, but the other way is not really needed. And we needed to run it a couple times a day because of the development cycle, development process of that module. And of course, using the production website is completely out of context for that. So we needed to have our own copy. And we figured that Docker can help us, Docker can save our day, because we can have development and testing environment that's very much like resembles the actual setup. We have two separate Drupal containers with Apache, PHP Composer, and two separate versions of PHP. So we can use PHP 7 for Drupal 8 and PHP 5.6 for Drupal 7. We didn't want to have both of on the PHP 7 because we really wasn't paid for dealing with checking whether Drupal 7 will be working just fine with PHP 7. So that's why. We have two separate MySQL containers, so two separate databases. And we have a special, not really very special, but volumes configuration that can be, that will allow one container to access the other file system. So, our setup is like this. One special Dockerfile. And Dockerfile is a piece of configuration that tells Docker how to build container. So we have one Dockerfile prepared for Drupal 8, one Dockerfile prepared for Drupal 7, DockerCompose file, which will, right now I find no better word than orchestrate, but it will just tell how those services, how those containers connect together. And we had some directory layout, and I prepared a GitHub repository for this example. I actually tested this repository and I tested this code, so it's working, or at least it should be. And this repository contains all the things I'm talking about here. So everybody who is interested can take a look there and see how it was done. So let's dive into right now Dockerfile. Excuse me, but question to you: are you able to see anything of this? Okay, so are you seeing this line? Okay, that's good. I will be like pointing and explaining. Maybe I will try like this because I need to see what I'm pointing at. Okay, so right now it is like a short, very short tutorial about the Dockerfile. So this line is explaining or telling Docker on which thing we need to base the container that we are going to build. So right now we are telling Docker pull PHP version 5.6 with bundled Apache and base our container around this. The second line is just running some commands. So the run in Dockerfile is just running some command in Dockerfile, and here we are just enabling mod rewrite for obvious reasons. And this line is just like install some dependencies. For example, something for this is GD, and here we are just enabling GD extension, not exception. And these are like this magic spells for Docker just to tell how to build this setup. And here we are setting working directory for this container, which is obviously var ww. This is just like telling the Docker this will be default directory for our container. And those lines are just like installing Drush. Everybody, I think, know what the Drush is. So it's like telling, for example, telling like a farmer how to milk a cow. From my perspective, like telling you what Drush is like telling the farmer how to milk a cow. So that was like my joke. Now you should laugh. And Drupal 8 Dockerfile is quite similar, but not really. First of all, we have this line is different. It's just telling how Docker to base our build on PHP 7. So we have PHP 7, which is awesome, apparently. Next is quite the same set of magical spells. This is this is the drush, and here is new part, which is install the composer. I guess you all know what the composer is. Composer is like awesome tool as well, like drush, which allows to install the dependencies. I took a liberty of making the special script that installs composer into this, and there's like one new command from for Dockerfile. Dockerfile, actually Docker, is like contained. So unless you directly copy something into the container or tell the Docker to mount specific volume into the site directory, it's like all encapsulated, and you cannot access the external file system. So this is good, but recently, I don't remember the details, there was a probably maybe it still is, vulnerability in the Docker that allows to overcome this and exploit that. So keep in mind that. And why is this just like brief digression? This is really bad because Docker is running inside the root user. So when you like exploit the vulnerability and mount the root file system, you are actually gaining a root control to the host operating system, which is really, really bad. So that's end of my digression. And here this line, which is just copy, it tells to copy from the local directory, which resides side by side the Docker file, a file called composer install, and copy it into user local bin, and then just like make it runnable, run it, which will install the composer into the working directory. So, and then last but not least, we need to have MySQL client so we can do stuff with MySQL. Okay, so next on, DockerCompose. DockerCompose is, I told this like a couple of times before, but I will say it, it's like very nice tool. And it's very simple. I bet you already get the idea why is this, what is this. Basically, this is like the version, blah, 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 but these are the databases. We have two database instances called DB7 and DB8. One is surprisingly for Drupal 8, second is for surprisingly for Drupal 7. And one important thing about the Docker, which I already mentioned, it's it has an ephemerical files structure. File system, which means each restart will kill all the data unless we have a volume to mount it. So this is for for that, so we can have like persistent storage of data. And here is the configuration for Drupal 8. So this is like the build, so we specified the Dockerfile, so it will build the given container, and here is volumes. We take like a directory confusingly named D7, which will contain Drupal 7 source code. We will then mount it as a var www d7 and by analogy d8 var www d8. So this part is on the container, and this is like Apache configuration. So we can easily make any changes to the Apache, and as well for PHP ini. And here is like the interesting part, which is this telling the Docker to map ports, and particularly port 8250 to port 80. So whenever you type in localhost 8250, you should go to this, and it's linking to the DB8. And the configuration for Docker with Drupal 7 is very similar, just like the paths are changing to address the Drupal 7. Also, Drupal 7 does not have to have access to the directory with Drupal 8. And again, it's different port and different DB. So I prepared a couple of fake screenshots telling you that it's working. And one awesome thing that about Docker, oh no, it's not awesome. This is awesome thing. When we connect to the database, Docker is like creating whole convoluted networks inside itself, but DockerCompose make it super easy by just like if we need to connect to other system in the given compose configuration, you just enter the name of the service, and that's it. As you can see, this is value from the DockerCompose file, and this is the configuration. Here is a fake screenshot telling us that under this address you get to Drupal 8, and that it's running on this kind of PHP. So I'm good with Photoshop. And analogy, by analogy, this is PHP 5.6. This is Drupal 7, as you can see. And here is the database host. Rest is quite similar. And one thing, how this is, well, no, yes. This is how we can connect to like fake login into the container to run some commands. And I just connected to the Drupal 8. And as you can see here, I can ping successfully Drupal 7, and I can also wget Drupal 7. As you can see, I'm using the service name here instead of any other things. So, onward to the summary. Summary, okay, so Docker is fun, especially with Compose. Having two versions of PHP, having two versions of any kind of software, testing, for example, any part of the software against some PHP version, some software, some MySQL version is not a problem with with Docker. You can create a complex setup with ease. You can use as much services as you can have. You can also, with this approach, check the load balancer approach. When this is like when you have the legacy website and you have a new website and you route the net traffic to the new website when it's already rewritten to the new website, and the old and rest of the traffic to the old website. So it like handles the same website but by two versions. So and you can test it with DockerCompose, I think. And Drupal and Docker get along very well. There is, as I already said, official image for Drupal. You can just run it and it will just spin the spin the Drupal. Very simple. And it's best if you want to test a new version of Drupal and you don't have time for installation and stuff like this. So this setup, this feature is something that can be very, it like tickles with your imagination. You can do a lot of stuff. You can combine a lot of services with Docker. So I think that that's it. Thank you for listening me my words, which I was saying. And if you have any questions, just raise a hand. And if you right now do not have any question, you can contact me via these things like LinkedIn and my email here. So thank you very much for listening to me.
Hi, thank you. And could you please advise how to set the correct name of the host for Docker container, like test.log? Maybe this is possible to do via DockerCompose.
Can you repeat your question?
How to set in correct way name of the local host in the Docker container?
With the Docker, so you want to, for example, do not want to have localhost port name or but some domain, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is not. We have this issue in the another project, and we use something like called page kite. So it's kind of cheating. But this tool allows you to set up some domain and like target your network traffic through that domain. Or you can set up, for example, Nginx or Lite. I think that Apache for that will be overkill, but as well, and just like route the traffic through the proxy.
Migration?
Well, it wasn't like we needed. The performance issue wasn't the case in this particular example. We had like tested with the Vagrant, and the Vagrant was too slow, and we could work with the Docker, actually.
And it was faster, right?
Yeah, Docker was faster, and Docker is faster, but there is a big asterisk unless you are on the Linux. And because on macOS and Windows, Docker is run by the virtual machine, very slim Vagrant virtual machine, but still it's like some abstraction, some virtual machine, and then another abstraction, another virtual machine. So it balanced out on the other operating system. But on Ubuntu, it's like.
And how many entities approximately did you migrate in that way?
Well, this was like one website, but it was huge.
How much?
Like 2,000 nodes in Drupal.
Thanks.
Do you use production?
No, because of the thing that I spoke before, that it's too big risk for right now having a Docker in production because of the possible bug and taking over the host operating system, and client like have his own setup. So it was like decided for us we needed only migration and we need only that for development environment. Yeah.
Do you run Docker as a root user on production?
Can you repeat again, please?
Do you run Docker as root user from root?
Yeah, Docker is, let me rephrase that. Docker is using the root user, yeah, but you can change it to any kind of user.
Yeah, because as I know, it's against secure rules.
Yeah. But in this example, I'm just using like the simplest example.
Just for example.
But we actually have a different setup for other like projects, and we are not using a root user there. We create a special user, and okay, there was a question here.
Or macOS.
So you want to know
is overhead between native system like Ubuntu or macOS and the Docker container in a percent?
Okay, it's we actually because we are using Docker not on the production but on the staging. The only thing on the stage and the testing environments, only thing I can tell you that we did not benchmark actually between like running given site directly on the operating system and with Docker. But I can surely tell you that it's nearly as fast, but I don't have any numbers. So it's nearly as fast. It's like indistinguishable for naked eye.
Thanks.
Okay.
Hey, what do you think about container that contains more than one process inside? What do you think about that idea? Is it bad, or maybe in some situation it's good practice?
There is like discussion within the Docker community what's the best, and I think that the common sense is the best, like guidance, and we are actually following this rule. Containers should contain everything to run given application. So I did this error before, and I make like separate container for server, for PHP process, for PHP command line, for PHP FPM, and I came to conclusion that, well, I can put it in one container and it will do the trick, and I think that it's Occam razors actually. I think that unless you have really good reasons to separate things, you should only put the necessary stuff in one container, but you shouldn't put like database inside, you shouldn't put things that can be connected to the application externally.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Okay, it appears. Oh,
Did you try to use Ansible for configuration, for advanced configuration?
okay. Can you repeat and just more louder?
Did you try to use Ansible to configure this Docker container?
No, Ansible would be overkill for Docker configuration. In Docker, you just install 1 or 2 services in container. So using the Ansible for Dockerfile or for setting up Docker container would be kind of overkill. But we used Ansible for Vagrant. So this is. I don't know if this answer your question or not.
Thank you.
Okay. So if there is no more questions, I'm very glad to had opportunity to talk to you, and thank you.
And please don't forget that there is a group photo right in front of the hotel, like in a few minutes.